I already know there will be people that will accuse me of being anti-woke simply because I'm making a negative review of Barbie. This has become one of those movies that's near damn impossible to criticize just because of a loud minority of people that hate it for the wrong reasons. If it weren't for these three clowns, it would be so much easier to say I hate Barbie, but unfortunately that's not the case at all. And so now, if you even dare to criticize this movie, you will run the risk of people automatically assuming you're anti-woke, even if your reasons for not liking the movie have nothing to do with wokeness in any way, shape, or form. A classic case of people judging books by their cover. For those that clicked on this video expecting me to be anti-woke, allow me to debunk that allegation in the best way that I can. My favorite movie of 2023, and a movie that I think should have gotten the success and attention that Barbie received, is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. This is a movie that has a black Spider-Man, a female Spider-Man, an Indian Spider-Man, and a punk Spider-Man as four of its main characters. There's a scene in the movie where you can very clearly see a Black Lives Matter pin on Miles Morales' backpack, as well as another scene where you can see a Protect Trans Kids flag in Gwen Stacy's room, which has led to speculation from fans that Gwen Stacy herself is transgender. By all accounts, Across the Spider-Verse is a woke movie, more woke than Barbie, I would say, and yet despite that, I have given it nothing but praise ever since it first came out. I still acknowledge it as one of the greatest animated movies ever made, one of the greatest sequels ever made, a landmark in animation history. The only bad thing about this movie, and it has nothing to do with the quote-unquote woke elements of the movie, it's a problem that is unfortunately very rampant in the film industry, but it has nothing to do with wokeness in any way, shape, or form. I'm not stupid, okay? If I hated Barbie for anti-woke reasons, then I would hate Across the Spider-Verse as well for similarly anti-woke reasons. But I don't. It would make no sense for me to criticize Barbie for being woke and then praise a movie that's arguably more woke than Barbie. So to make a long story short, yes, this is a negative review of Barbie. No, it has nothing to do with wokeness. My criticisms, my problems with this movie have nothing to do with wokeness in any way, shape, or form. I'm not going to blindly complain about the politics or the messages of this movie just because of wokeness. Admittedly, I do have a few problems with the execution of these messages, but that's very different from saying this movie has bad messages, it's woke, whatever. Now that we've gotten the elephant in the room out of the way, let us proceed forward with the review, and by God, do I have a lot to say about this movie. Barbie is one of the biggest movies to come out of the 2020s decade thus far. It was the highest grossing movie of 2023, it is the highest grossing movie from Warner Bros., it is the highest grossing comedy of all time, and it is one of the highest grossing movies of all time in general. A big part of its success largely comes from the fact that it came out on the same day as a wildly different movie, that being Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. At first, people made memes and jokes about how these two wildly different movies were coming out on the same day, but once both movies released, people began to notice there were similarities between the two movies, mainly when it came to the themes that they have. This began the phenomenon of Barbenheimer, where people would encourage each other to see both movies together on the same day, July 21st, 2023, as a double feature. As much as I hate to admit it in retrospect, this was something that absolutely needed to happen. This was a phenomenon that happened at the right place at the right time. Throughout 2023, there were an unusually large amount of box office flops being put out. Movies that either did straight up awful at the box office or they did make money, but they still underperformed. As a matter of fact, one of these movies didn't necessarily flop that hard, but it did underperform below expectations, and it was largely in part because of Barbenheimer. There was one movie released in 2023 that had its box office performance affected heavily by Barbenheimer, and then you combine that with the large amount of strikes that were going on in 2023 within the actors and the writers in Hollywood. Most of the movies that flopped during this time flopped because there was almost no promotion for them because of the strikes. Well, that and the fact that most of these movies are garbage, but that's beside the point. So these two movies being a massive cultural phenomenon was something that was absolutely needed. It was a necessary evil, as much as I hate to admit it. This was something that movie theaters all around the world absolutely needed in order to continue striving in 2023. Listen, it was either this or the mediocre pop star. We didn't really have much of a choice back then. For better or worse, I was not able to watch both movies together on the same day. I was on vacation around the time of July 21st, 2023, and so I was only able to watch one movie opening day, and that was Barbie. I wouldn't watch Oppenheimer until I got back, which was like a week later. I remember having a lot of, I guess you could say, ironic excitement for this movie. This movie was an inside joke between me and a few of my family members. We would all joke about the movie and how it would be the greatest movie ever made and whatever, a life-changing experience, that sort of thing. It was ironic, but it was in good faith. It wasn't like to make fun of the movie, to say that the movie was going to be bad. It was all like, yeah, this was probably going to be a good movie, but we would joke about how it would be far better than what it actually is. And then the movie came out. I watched it with my family. Again, I was out of town, so my family and I went to this random movie theater. There were a lot of people there that were wearing pink. I wore pink myself, of course. I watched the movie, I leave, and to my surprise, I loved the movie. I unironically thought it was great. In retrospect, I look at it as being a case of hype bias, where I was just too distracted by the hype of experiencing Barbenheimer that I decided, yeah, this was a 10 out of 10 movie, perfection right here. As time went on, slowly but surely, my perception of Barbie would start to change. I would go from loving this movie to thinking, it's alright, to now actively disliking the movie. I think the cracks began to show during the 2024 Oscars, when this movie was nominated for a lot of Oscars, including the big Oscar, Best Picture. Now, I wouldn't have a problem with this at all if it weren't for the fact that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, a movie that I still stand as the best movie of 2023, and one of the only good movies to come out of 2023 for that matter, got basically nothing. It received almost no nominations. It was only nominated for one category, the predictable Best Animated Feature category, and it didn't even win it. I understand maybe they didn't feel comfortable giving this movie any attention because of the toxic workplace allegations that came out about it, but still, this is a work of art. It's an amazing movie. This is one of the only good movies of 2023. This is unanimously agreed to be one of the only good movies of 2023. Why the would you not give it any more attention? Why would you not nominate it for Best Picture? Why would Barbie be nominated for Best Picture over Across the Spider-Verse? Like, I still loved Barbie at the time, but I knew for a fact it was not Across the Spider-Verse, and so it made no sense to me at all. I know that Oppenheimer would have won regardless of if Across the Spider-Verse was nominated or not. I know that was going to be an inevitable thing regardless, but still, it would have been nice to just give this movie a little bit of that recognition that it deserves. It's more just the implication that the Oscars, the people that run the Oscars, they watched both of these movies and they decided that Barbie was the better movie. They decided that Barbie was more worthy of Best Picture than Across the Spider-Verse. And that is absolutely ridiculous to me. I'm not just saying this because animation is cinema, blah blah blah. I'm also saying this because, it's a really good movie, and it should just not be ignored like that. There are tons of categories that Across the Spider-Verse could have been nominated for, and it was only nominated for Best Animated Feature, and that's it. How much do y'all want to bet they're going to do the exact same thing next year? 2024 is a year that has given us almost nothing but Razzie bait. You know how people say 1999 was one of the best years for movies, 2004 was one of the best years for movies, etc. Yeah, 2024, one of the worst years in movie history, easily. And because of that, I will be amazed. I will genuinely be amazed if once again the Oscars refuse to acknowledge that one of the only good movies of 2024 was indeed an animated movie. I'm not looking forward to seeing history repeat itself again. I'm really not. I know that this was a petty reason to start disliking Barbie, but I don't know, Across the Spider-Verse was such an amazing movie, and it just made no sense to me at all that one of the only good movies of 2023 was ignored in what is supposed to be this big celebration of movies that came out the previous year. Is that not what the Oscars are? They're supposed to be a celebration of cinema from the previous year. And so you have this movie that everyone agrees this is one of the only good movies of 2023. It gets no attention. Because it's animated, that's why. And then as we progressed further and further into 2024, my thoughts on the movie would begin to lean towards the negative rather than the positive. And it's not even just because of the Oscar stuff. As the year went by, I just started growing more of a dislike towards this movie. As we get further and further away from July 21st, 2023, I think to myself, where was I on that day? What was I doing on that day? Where was I mentally during that time? And it leads to me believing that no, I won't like Barbie all that much in retrospect. And so, lo and behold, very recently I decided to rewatch Barbie after all this time. My first time watching the movie ever since that titular day, July 21st, 2023. I was hoping that I would be proven wrong and that the movie would still hold up after all this time. I would still love this movie. Even if I didn't think it was a 10 out of 10 movie like I did when I first watched it, I was hoping I could still be able to enjoy it for what it was. Unfortunately, that ended up not being the case. Now, before I go over the problems that I have with this movie, I'm gonna get a few of the positives out of the way because I want to be nice, alright? For starters, Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling are both fantastic as Barbie and Ken respectively. They couldn't have chosen better actors and actresses to play these two characters. It's like they were meant to play these two characters. Imagine going back in time and telling people that in the future, the girl from The Wolf of Wall Street and the driver from Drive would be Barbie and Ken. Nobody would believe you. Nobody. And yet here we are. And thankfully, it turned out perfectly. It reminds me so much specifically of the live-action Scooby-Doo movies from the early 2000s, the casting they went with, Matthew Lillard as Shaggy, Linda Cardellini as Velma. It's perfect casting, they were just born to play these characters. I cannot imagine any other actors playing these characters. Ryan Gosling as Ken reminds me so much of Freddie Prinze Jr. as Fred, it's not even funny. The rest of the cast is great as well, but Margot and Ryan are clearly the standouts here. I also want to say that I absolutely love the set design of Barbie Land. I love the way that everything looks. I love the fact that it's all a 100% real set. There is no CGI at all to my knowledge, and if there is CGI, and let's face it, there's a high chance there's at least a little bit of CGI here, it's barely noticeable. Most of it is a set, and I respect that a lot. I specifically love those little moments when Barbie and Ken are traveling to the real world, and so it's they're on a rocket ship, they're riding a bicycle, they're on a boat, etc. And so everything, it's the way everything looks, it looks like a stage, it's a play or something like that, and I love it. I love the way that it looks. It's adorable. It adds a little bit of charm to this otherwise mostly charmless movie. The final positive that I want to give out is some of the songs in the movie are good, and by that I mean only 2 of the songs are good. What Was I Made For from Billie Eilish and I'm Just Ken from Ryan Gosling. I don't doubt the possibility that there are other good songs within the movie's soundtrack, but these are the 2 clear standouts. What Was I Made For is an absolutely beautiful song. I don't really care for Billie Eilish's music all that much. I don't think it's bad, but it's just not for me. It's not my sort of thing. But What Was I Made For is a beautiful song. It's a very slow, soft, emotional ballad, which you would not expect a song like this to be part of a movie based on Barbie of all things, and yet its inclusion in the movie is absolutely perfect. It's already a great song on its own, but its usage in the movie makes it even better than it already is. The ending scene where Barbie is with her creator as she finds out what her purpose is genuinely a beautiful moment. One of the only great moments in the entire movie. It almost makes me feel bad for the fact that I don't like this movie all that much in retrospect. I'm gonna admit, I was moved a little bit rewatching the ending of this movie, just because it's so perfectly done. It almost makes me forget about the flaws that this movie has. It almost makes me forget about the real reason I don't like this movie. Almost. Admittedly, while I was watching it, I did get a little bit of tonal whiplash when I reminded myself that yes, I am indeed watching a movie about Barbie, but I think the ending of this movie is powerful enough for me to completely forget about that and just let it slide. An absolutely powerful ending, if only the rest of the movie was on the same level of quality. And then I'm Just Ken is, well, I mean, it's I'm Just Ken. It doesn't really need much of an introduction. It's iconic. That Dua Lipa song that became like the big pop hit from the movie's soundtrack, it's alright. I didn't have a problem with it at first, but then it became played to death on the radio, even long after Barbie became irrelevant, and so now I just look at it as just, it's background noise. I don't care for it anymore. I don't really listen to Dua Lipa's music all that much. I don't have anything against it. In fact, I'll even go as far as to say that Levitating is a banger, but I feel like very soon people will get tired of like the disco revival sound that her music has. It was fun when she did it in Future Nostalgia, but now I think it's become old and people want to see her do something new, something interesting with her music. Also, as well, the first time I ever heard this song was on a car ride. It was a particularly really an awful car ride that I don't want to go into detail about, but it was a really miserable car ride for me personally, and surprisingly, the many times I've heard this song on the radio, I never thought of that miserable car ride. It wouldn't be until I heard the song within the movie itself that I got reminded of that car ride. I got reminded, oh yeah, the first time I ever heard this song was during a terrible car ride for me. So, you know, there's that to throw in as well. And this ties into probably the main reason I don't like this movie. But again, we'll get to that much later on. Oh yeah, one more thing. This movie starts off with a song from Lizzo playing in the background, which is really awkward to watch right now given everything that would come out about her literally only like a month or two after this movie came out, as if it wasn't obvious enough already that this movie is going to age badly in the future. It's like the movie decided to give us this early warning sign, this early red flag if you will, which is honestly really generous of the movie to do. Thank you, movie, thank you. And that's it for all of the positives. Now let's go on over to the negatives. This movie is a comedy, supposedly. And I say supposedly because holy shit, this is unfunny looking back. A lot of the jokes in this movie feel very forced and awkward. Like everything is just on the nose. A big problem that a lot of movies have nowadays is that nothing feels genuine anymore. Nothing feels sincere. A lot of movies have like really stupid things in them, and they acknowledge that they're stupid. A lot of modern movies, they acknowledge that. You watch an MCU movie and you see something fantastical included, something, you know, unrealistic, something stupid, and the main characters make a meta joke about that stupid thing. You know, the infamous, that just happened style of humor that, like, the MCU has. That meta, ironic, self-aware style of humor that more and more people are getting tired of seeing, and yet we still get them in movies for some reason. Somehow they haven't gotten the memo that no, we don't think this crap is funny anymore. Please stop putting this in your movies. Barbie is, unfortunately, definitely not exempt from this. To give Barbie a tiny bit of credit, at least it is a little bit genuine in its stupidity. Like the very beginning opening moments of the movie, it's like everything is stupid and goofy, and like it embraces that stupid, goofy nature. There's no ironic, self-aware meta jokes about it. There are later on in the movie, but for the very beginning, at least it plays it 100% seriously. It takes its stupidity seriously. It embraces the fact that it's goofy, and it feels like a little bit of a breath of fresh air. And it's unfortunate that it's only a little bit, because the rest of the movie has the same meta style of humor that you would find in an MCU movie. There's a scene in the movie after Barbie comes back to Barbie Land and she sees that the Kens have taken over, and so like she confronts Ryan Gosling's Ken, and then like she's basically kicked out, and so like now she's like sad and depressed and whatever. And then it's immediately followed up with this like fake commercial, existential crisis Barbie or whatever. And it's genuinely one of the most unfunny things I've ever seen in my life. It feels like a fucking nostalgia critic skit, you know? This doesn't feel like something I would expect to see from a big budget Hollywood movie. And then you have a scene later on in the movie where Barbie is complaining about how she's ugly and she's not beautiful and whatever. And then very abruptly the narrator says something along the lines of like, "Note to the filmmakers, Margot Robbie is not the right actress to play Barbie if you want to prove this point," or something along those lines. And it's like, I was probably dying of laughter when I saw this in theaters for the first time. I want to imagine the whole theater was just roaring with laughter. And then I rewatch it again, it's like, oh my god, bro, this is so unfunny. What the hell is this? I didn't expect this movie to be a laugh out loud gut buster upon rewatch, but I didn't expect it to be this unfunny either. Some of the comedy in this movie is so fucking bad that I have to pause the movie and remind myself of three things. Number one, this is the highest grossing comedy of all time, released long after the genre became irrelevant. All of those iconic, timeless, instantly quotable comedies from the 90s and 2000s, yeah, they've made less money than this. I know that box office stuff was different back then when compared to how it is nowadays, but still, it's crazy to think that. Number two, this movie was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. And number three, more specifically, this movie was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars over one of the greatest animated movies ever made, and one of the only good movies of 2023 in general. Are you starting to see why I have a problem with Spider-Verse's snub? As far as the comedy in this movie goes, it's like 1% better than MCU humor, I want to say. It's only slightly above MCU humor, and that's it. The only times in this movie where I feel like I'm watching a Best Picture nominated movie are the few emotional, sincere moments in the movie, the much slower moments in the movie. But even then, there's only like 3 of them in the entire movie. And sometimes they can get screwed over by the terrible comedy. You know how earlier I praised the ending of this movie for being beautiful and emotional and whatever? Yeah, they had to go and immediately screw that up with an unfunny joke. Almost immediately after, you see Barbie in the real world now, and the first thing you see her do is see a gynecologist. And then that's it. That's how the movie ends. And then the cherry on top is you get to hear the really an awful Nicki Minaj and Ice Spice song play as the credits roll. Not even a minute ago, this movie had a genuinely powerful, beautiful moment, and it's completely ruined now. The classic, take a sincere, emotional moment and completely ruin it with an extremely unfunny joke almost immediately after. When the MCU does it, it's bad. When Barbie does it, it's perfectly fine. I don't get it. It makes no sense to me. I know that humor is subjective, but I genuinely don't see how anyone could find this movie funny. I brought up earlier that I could see this movie aging badly for a lot of people in the future, and that's mainly just because of how unfunny this movie is. The way I look at it, maybe the messages would still resonate with a lot of people, and so that's why they'll still like the movie in the future. but the comedy is awful. There is no way anyone is gonna go back to this movie and find it hilarious to sit through. Oh yeah, and speaking of the messages, I think it's time we dive into that rabbit hole, but not before giving out one final example of why the comedy doesn't work, which also transitions into some of the problems that I have with the messages in this movie, the way that they're executed. So you have that scene where Barbie is at Mattel and she sees like all the people working at Mattel and she asks to see the woman in charge of Mattel, in which the person in charge is Will Ferrell's character. Barbie is surprised at the fact that there is not a single woman in charge at Mattel, to which Will Ferrell goes on about how Mattel has had a rich history of women, bringing up that woman worked at the company many years ago and whatnot, and it's a prime example of show, don't tell. Let the audience notice the irony in the fact that there is not a single woman in charge of a doll made for girls. It's just men and that's it. No woman at all. If you have to spell it out to the audience, then that makes the joke not funny and it makes the message feel forced and ham-fisted. It is entirely possible to have it be a lot more subtle, to have the audience notice the irony in all of this. There is not a single woman in charge of taking care of Barbie. All of the people that work on Barbie at Mattel are men. The contextual irony makes it funnier and it makes the message feel more natural in the movie. I'm just gonna go and say this right off the bat. This movie does not have bad messages in it. This movie has good messages that are badly executed. There is a very big difference. They are not the same thing. I don't care what the critical drinker says. Don't let him gaslight you into thinking otherwise. I'm not surprised that a Barbie movie has feminist themes in it. Like, no duh. Why would it not have feminist themes? Why would a Barbie movie in 2023 not have feminist themes in it? It would make no sense at all. No, I don't think that this is an anti-male movie. No, the message of this movie is not man bad, woman good. If this truly was an anti-male movie, then why is Ryan Gosling in this movie? Why is Will Ferrell in this movie? Why are any of the male actors that are in this movie in this movie? Do you think that any male actor would willingly want to be part of a movie that is supposedly anti-man? No. It's ridiculous. It would make no sense at all. If someone tried to make an anti-female movie, do you think there's gonna be any actress that would want to be part of it? Of course not. Don't be ridiculous. A black person would never willingly be part of a movie that's explicitly racist. A gay person would never willingly be part of a movie that's explicitly homophobic. So why would a man willingly be part of a movie that's supposedly anti-male? It makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. And I'm only focusing on the actors of this movie. There are writers, producers, people behind the scenes that have worked on this movie that are men as well. Do you think that any of these men would want to be part of a movie that is supposedly anti-male? Of course not. That being said, I do have a few problems with the messages that are in this movie when it comes to how they're executed. So for starters, you have that scene where Barbie meets the girl at her school, and the girl starts criticizing Barbie, claiming that like Barbie is misogynistic, Barbie represents a negative stereotype for women, etc. Barbie is harmful for women, that sort of thing. And you think that's going to be a big part of this movie. You think that's going to be a theme that will be tackled in this movie, and then it's never brought up again. Neither the girl nor Barbie ever acknowledge it for the rest of the movie. It would have been interesting to see the movie handle the real life criticisms that Barbie receives, but it doesn't. It does nothing about it. And so it makes you question, why the is it in the movie in the first place? You could still have the scene where Barbie meets the girl at her school, but then you could replace the dialogue with literally anything else, and it would change nothing. You could get rid of the movie being aware of the criticisms that Barbie receives, and it would change nothing. Nothing about the plot would be affected in any way. When I first watched this movie in theaters, I did take note of that. That the movie acknowledged the real world criticisms that Barbie received and how it did literally nothing with that. I was hoping that rewatching this movie, maybe I missed out. Maybe they actually explore that a little bit more, but no. It's this one scene that they explore it in, and that's it. I just wanted to get this out of the way because it's a much smaller thing when compared to some of the other problems I have with the movie's messages. It's just a really weird thing to me, the fact that like this movie brings up a theme that could have been interesting and then it does literally nothing with it. As I brought up before, no, I don't think this movie has an anti-male message in it, but that doesn't mean that I think the message is well executed. At its core, the movie does have a good message. The movie does explore the inequalities that women face when compared to men. The problem is that it doesn't explore these themes very well. They're not well executed. Again, this movie has a good message that's badly executed. That's different from having a bad message. In the scene where Barbie is going back to Barbie Land with the mom and the daughter, she sees like these two Kens playing volleyball, and you know, sometimes you see like the Kens doing their own thing, and the movie tries to paint it out like it's a bad thing, and I'm sorry, but sometimes I wonder why it's a bad thing. Like the first time they notice something is different about Barbie Land, you see two Kens playing volleyball and having a good time, and you're confused. You're wondering, okay, why is this a bad thing? What's wrong with it? You see that all of the Barbies that used to be the ones playing volleyball are instead now servants to the Kens, and that's a bad thing, of course. I understand that's a bad thing, just having the woman be objects, having them be servants to please the men. But then you look on the other side of just, you know, the men are just, you know, having a good time. They're talking about like stuff that interests them to the Barbies, and you're a bit confused, like, why is this a bad thing? What's wrong with this? I understand that this movie does have themes of gender equality in it. The Barbies and the Kens should be treated equally. Again, the problem is that the movie doesn't really do it all that well. I feel like there is a better way to display that, like, the Kens having total control of Barbie Land is a bad thing. There is a way to make it look bad, to make you understand that, yes, the Kens are the bad guys in this story. Or maybe they're not the bad guys, but they are doing something bad. This is my interpretation of what went wrong. The movie begins, and you could clearly see the Barbies doing all of the important stuff, all of the fun stuff. They do everything. And then the Kens, they do basically nothing. They're only there to serve the Barbies. They don't get to do any of the important stuff or any of the fun stuff that the Barbies do. This movie eventually does try to have a sort of equality message that no, the Barbies and the Kens should be treated equally. This movie is supposed to highlight the double standards that the Kens feel. It's okay for the Barbies to do everything in Barbie Land without the Kens, but it's not okay for the Kens to do everything without the Barbies. The problem is that you watch the beginning of this movie and there is no indication at all that this is actually kind of a bad thing. It would be better if there was like a subtle implication, like maybe you get to see some of the Kens together and just you get an idea that like maybe things aren't all that perfect. You think that everything is going perfectly and smoothly and whatever within Barbie Land at the beginning of the movie, but in reality, that's not the case. It's not perfect or smooth. The Kens feel like they don't get the same treatment, the same respect that they give to the Barbies. And then later on into the movie, when it's the other way around, when it's the Kens that are doing all of the fun stuff and all of the important stuff and whatever, and the Barbies do nothing. They're just servants to the Kens. Now you got the opposite problem, where the movie makes it way too obvious that this is a bad thing. It's so much more on the nose and upfront about how this is a bad thing. And then the only thing to really implicate that it is a bad thing are the way that the Barbies are being treated. The fact that they do nothing but serve the Kens, give them beer, you know, stuff like that. And I feel that this message would be much stronger if you saw something like this in the beginning of the movie, where you just get to see a little bit of like the Ken's point of view. How maybe they don't like just being servants to the Barbies. Maybe they want to do more stuff. Maybe they want to have the freedom that the Barbies have. And so it makes the movie's themes of gender inequality and double standards and whatnot, it would make it feel more like it would hit harder. This is not a nitpick. This is not me criticizing the movie for being anti-male or woke or anything like that. This is me providing valid criticism towards the messages in this movie. This is me explaining how the messages in this movie could have been done better. Once again, and I cannot stress this enough, the problem is not the messages that are in this movie. The problem is the way that the messages in this movie are executed. I think my issues with the way the movie's messages were handled largely comes from the kind of unsatisfying ending that the movie has. Now I know what people are gonna say. Didn't I literally praise the ending of this movie for being beautiful and emotional and whatever? Yeah, I did. Barbie being with her creator, wondering what her purpose is, that is a beautiful moment, but you look beyond that. You look at the other things that are implied within like the last few minutes of the movie, and I don't know, it just kind of feels unsatisfying to me in a way. If I'm correct, it's implied that the Kens going forward will receive more respect from the Barbies than they had before, but not by much. I believe the whole thing with this movie is like the Kens will eventually have the same amount of respect in Barbie land that women have in the real world. And I get it, it's meant to parallel, the way that the Barbies treat the Kens in Barbie land are supposed to mirror the way that men treat women in the real world. But I still find it to be a fairly underwhelming ending, all things considered. I get it, this was probably intentional. They intentionally gave this movie an unsatisfying ending, but that doesn't make it good automatically. I've said this about Joker 2's ending, and even though it's nowhere near as bad, I'm gonna say it again for Barbie's ending. No, giving your movie a deliberately unsatisfying ending does not make you clever or unique or anything like that. Being subversive and not giving audiences what they wanted to see is not always a good thing. You shouldn't 100% cater to your audiences, but at the same time, you shouldn't just 100% ignore them either. There needs to be a 50-50 balance between the two. And unfortunately, both Joker 2 and Barbie fail in that aspect, although Barbie fails at it less badly when compared to Joker 2. With how things are going to be for the next few years, I feel like people would want this movie to have a much happier ending, a more ideal ending. People would want to see the Barbies and the Kens living together in harmony, working together to make Barbie Land even better than it was before. Something that would give men and women alike just that feeling of optimism, that hope that eventually this could become a reality. Something to help bring them a little bit of comfort, to help make them forget about how things are unfortunately going to be in the real world. I know that people are going to defend this movie and say that it's good that it has an unsatisfying ending because it reflects how things are in the real world. And if this was some deep, serious movie, then yeah, I'd understand where you're coming from. But this is a comedy about in Barbie, okay? This whole thing is a glorified toy commercial when you really think about it. The underlying message of this movie is capitalism. Consume product. Buy more Barbie products at your local Target. Corporations are your friends. I'm not saying that this movie shouldn't have deep, serious moments in it or anything like that, but at the same time, it should not ignore what it actually is. It tries desperately to pretend that it's something else, but it's not. No matter how many serious themes this movie puts into itself, at its core, it's still a comedy with humor that's only one step above the MCU's, based on a doll made for little girls. Give me my happy ending, please, for the love of God. This was supposed to be the fun, escapist comedy that would make us forget about how awful the real world is, while Oppenheimer was supposed to be the serious, realistic, depressing movie that would remind us of how awful the real world is. So why do both movies insist on reminding us of how awful the real world is? I don't get it. And with that said, I want to go on to the main reason I don't like this movie. I'm gonna be honest with y'all about something. The title is kind of clickbait. I don't like this movie, but I don't really hate it either. I rewatched the movie, and I didn't like it as much as I did back then, but I just found it to be extremely mediocre more than anything else. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would say this movie is like maybe a 4 out of 10. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's definitely not as good as everyone says it is. But what makes me dislike this movie heavily is where I was when it came out, what I was like mentally when the movie was released. And that's what makes me go from not liking the movie to hating the movie. Everything else I've talked about with this movie, I'll let it slide. The bad comedy, the problems I have with the messages, I'll let all of that slide. The messaging especially, if it turns out I'm wrong and that the message of the movie is a lot more clear and whatever, then you know what, I'm open to that. If my interpretations of the movie's messages are wrong, then they're wrong. I'll accept that, and I'll let it slide. What I will not let slide is this. I was going through a low point when this movie came out in the summer of 2023. And so now, when I look back on that time, when I think of this movie, when I get reminded of this movie, I get reminded of where I was mentally during that time. I get reminded of who I was during that time. And it makes me go from not liking the movie all that much, but not hating it, to straight up hating it. Many years ago, I joined a video game community on Twitter, which I will keep anonymous. In 2023, years after the specific game in question was discontinued, I started bullying a lot of the other people in that community, the few people that were still around in that now dormant community. I would bully people, treat them like shit, and start unnecessary feuds for nothing. That car ride that I brought up earlier into the video, yeah, that was a heated argument that I had with some of the members of that community. I was desperately trying to convince myself that I was right and they were in the wrong, but it was no use at the time. I couldn't see it, but I was in the middle of a failing battle. There was no way for me to win. And now I've accepted that. It's better that I don't win. I would like to say that eventually I did make things right with these people. Something came up that made me realize what I was doing was wrong. And so throughout August and September of 2023, I would do everything I could to make things right with these people. It was unfortunately not easy though. And that was all thanks to Elon Musk. Now, as I brought up before, this was all on Twitter, and so it was during this time where Elon Musk was implementing a lot of different controversial changes into Twitter. I wanted to DM the people that had messages opened and to try and apologize to them. Try and be like, I'm sorry, I regret everything that I ever did to you. I realized what I was doing was wrong and I heavily regret it. Unfortunately, because of Elon Musk, I was forced against my will to pay in order to DM these people. It used to be free to DM people, and now it's not. You want to DM these people? You have to pay money in order to do it. I didn't have a choice, and so against my will, I had to give money to Elon Musk. Money that I will never get back. Money that is now forever going to be in the pockets of Elon Musk. I was desperate to make things right with these people. As we left 2023 and entered 2024, I had mostly moved on from this time. On rare occasions, I would get reminded of who I was the previous year, and I would feel regret and embarrassment over it. Going into the latter half of the year, though, around September, October 2024, not only did I start getting memories of who I was during that time more frequently, but now it had come to a point where it's whenever I got reminded of something that was popular during that time, I instantly connect it to who I was during that time, which would be Barbie in this case. One day in October, I had like a particularly crappy day. I don't want to go into detail about it. It had nothing to do with any of this stuff, but like one thought led to another. And so before you know it, I'm suffering a f***ing mental breakdown. I'm crying my eyes out. I'm bawling my eyes out thinking of this movie. Thinking of who I was when this movie came out. And how it was all like, it could have been prevented. All the stupid shit I would do to these people, none of it could have happened. It could have all been easily prevented. But I was too stupid at the time. I don't like Barbie because it reminds me of the lowest point in my entire life. Every time I see this movie, every time I get reminded of its success, I immediately think of where I was when it came out and how much of a terrible person I was back then. I don't know if this is going to ease the backlash or strengthen the backlash, but Oppenheimer is not spared from this either. Oppenheimer is just as guilty. This is not a Barbie bad, Oppenheimer good video. Oppenheimer is just as bad to me. I know that Oppenheimer is objectively a great movie and all that, but god f***ing damn it, you could not pay me to sit through this movie again. If I ever do a Christopher Nolan marathon, I'm skipping this movie. I don't care. I'm watching Dunkirk, and then I'm watching Tenet, and then I'm skipping this, and I'm going straight to whatever movie he's putting out in 2026. I don't care. Actually, why stop at Barbenheimer? Almost every movie that came out in 2023 is affected by this for me. Think of any movie that came out between May to September of 2023, and it applies to them as well. I just have this slight distaste towards them, regardless of their quality. It doesn't matter if it's a good movie like TMNT Mutant Mayhem or a bad movie like The Little Mermaid remake. It's all affected by this. I all have this mild distaste towards them because they remind me of who I was when they came out, when I watched them. You guys want to hear a plot twist? Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is a movie that I love with all of my f***ing heart, and not even that is exempt from this either. For a while I used to ask myself which movie was better, Into the Spider-Verse or Across the Spider-Verse. And only in recent times have I thought to myself, no, Into the Spider-Verse I like slightly more. I mean, they're both 10 out of 10 movies, don't get me wrong, but I like Into the Spider-Verse a little bit more just because it reminds me of a better time in my life. It reminds me of when I was happier and healthier. In retrospect, it gives me that calm before the storm pre-pandemic optimism that we obviously haven't gotten since 2020. It especially affects Barbenheimer simply because these were the biggest movies of 2023. Barbie was the biggest movie of 2023. It was one of the most acclaimed movies of 2023, and so naturally it would be the one that's affected by it the most. I could say that Indiana Jones 5 is affected by this as well, but like, no one cares about Indiana Jones 5. I sure as hell don't care about Indiana Jones 5. I watched this thing when it came out and I barely remember what happens in it. It's just a movie that exists. Who cares about it? And it flopped at the box office because no one cared about it. Barbie was a massively successful movie. It was the highest grossing movie of 2023. It was one of the most acclaimed movies of 2023. It was inescapable when it came out. And so naturally, it would be affected by this the most. I know that people are gonna say that like I'm overreacting over this, but I'm not. Maybe I am a little bit, but no, for the most part, I don't think I am. Sometimes it's normal to not like a piece of media because it gives you bad memories. I've read stories of people that were in like toxic relationships, and it's like the toxic one in the relationship loved a specific band, a specific song, something like that. And then once the non-toxic person got out of that relationship, every time they get reminded of that band, every time they see or hear anything relating to that band or that one specific song, even if it's an objectively good song like Bohemian Rhapsody or whatever, even if it's objectively good, they don't like it because it reminds them of a terrible time in their life. It gives them bad memories. And that's a valid reason to not like something. Upon rewatch, I did notice other flaws within this movie, so at least that helped, make me feel a little bit more comfortable in going over why I don't like this movie. I had planned on making a video on this movie for a very long time, but I never got around to doing it simply because I had other videos that I wanted to do instead. Once I got all of those videos out of the way, I decided it was time to talk about Barbie. It was time to rewatch this movie and open up about why I don't like this movie and my relationship with this movie. I understand 100% that it's not the movie's fault that I have this bad association with it. I have this bad memory associated with it. It's not Greta Gerwig's fault or anything like that. It's not Christopher Nolan's fault for Oppenheimer. These people have no idea who the I am, and it's for the better that way. I'm not gonna personally blame them for any of this. I'm not gonna blame the movies. This is entirely my own fault. But still, I cannot look at these movies in a positive light because of this. I was scared to make a video on this movie because I knew this was like a hard movie to criticize now because of people like The Quartering, because of people like The Critical Drinker, because of people like Ben Shapiro, the anti-woke right-wing people who think this movie is anti-male and whatever. And it made me scared to talk about this movie. It made me scared to criticize this movie, but this was too important of a topic for me to just stay silent over it. And so I decided nothing would get in the way of me making this video. I needed to make this video. It was going to be an important video for me. And then I know this is going to sound crazy. I promise you this is connected to why I'm so reluctant to talk about this movie. And then Trump won. Trump was reelected. He's becoming president again. And in that moment, I realized it went from being extremely hard to virtually f***ing impossible to criticize this movie. I have a story to tell. I was in the middle of watching this movie. I was like an hour into this movie one night, and I was like, you know what, this kind of sucks upon rewatch. I don't think it's all that funny, I don't think it's not that good. I don't like it all that much. I don't hate it, but I don't think it's all that good either. And then I decided to stop watching the movie because it was late at night, I was tired, and I wanted to go to sleep. And so the following night, I would resume watching the movie, and where I left off was the scene where Barbie is driving back to Barbie Land with the mom and the daughter, and she's going on about how like women are in charge at Barbie Land and they have a female president and stuff like that. And in that exact moment, I immediately paused the movie and I realized how hard it is for me to talk about this movie, how hard it will be for me to open up about like my relationship with this movie. And then before you knew it, I was crying again. I was having a mental breakdown because I knew that like no one would take what I was saying seriously. People would either assume that I'm misogynistic just because I don't like this movie, or that like I make a video on this movie and it ends up attracting actual misogynists that don't like the movie for bad reasons. And then because of, Trump winning and like Elon Musk has been heavily involved with Trump's campaign, it's like that brought back memories of like me trying to apologize to those people on Twitter and having it be hard to do because of Elon Musk and his changes to Twitter. And that just made me feel even worse about myself. I began questioning, was I a good person? Where did it all go wrong? Why have I become the person that I am today? I should not be feeling these emotions towards a stupid comedy based on a doll, and yet here I am feeling this way. I had to scrap this video at some point, only to then bring it back, because it was too important for me to cancel this video. It was too important for me to scrap it. I'm not against criticism. That's not what I'm trying to say. I understand that people are not going to agree with my takes on this movie, and that's fine. But at the very least, I want people to just understand where I'm coming from when I say that I don't like this movie. It has nothing to do with the messages or the politics of this movie. I might have problems with the way they're executed, but ultimately I'll just let it slide. And again, if it turns out that I'm wrong about the way the movie executes its messages, then so be it. I'm fine with that. I'm open to criticism, to people correcting me and be like, no, this is what the message of the movie actually is like. I am open to that, okay? I'm not scared of that. What I am scared of are the people that will blindly assume that, like, I support Ben Shapiro or whatever, just because I'm making a video talking about Barbie in a negative light. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about, okay? Let me show you a sentence. I hate Barbie because it reminds me of a low point in my life. That's a very self-explanatory, simple sentence right there. It tells you everything. Maybe I could go into more detail about the low point in question, but besides that, you understand what I'm trying to say. You understand where I'm coming from when I say I don't like the movie. The problem is, because of people like Ben Shapiro, a lot of people are just only going to focus on the first 3 words of the sentence, and that's it. They're only going to focus on the first 3 words of the sentence, and they're going to automatically assume that I'm some incel that looks up to Patrick Bateman or whatever, completely forgetting about the context, completely ignoring why I don't like the movie. I've spent the entire time making this video knowing that there is no way I will win this situation. Twitter and TikTok will get mad at me because they'll blindly assume that I hate the movie for the same reasons Ben Shapiro hates it, while incels will get mad at me because I don't hate the movie for the same reasons Ben Shapiro hates it. There is no way for me to win at all. I almost want to disable the comments section of this video because I know it's either going to be full of people that think that I'm misogynistic just because I don't like Barbie, or people that are actually misogynistic, people that hate Barbie for misogynistic reasons. Sometimes I wonder why I still like movies at this point. Why do I still care about cinema as an art form? I have made videos on a lot of bad movies that are far worse than Barbie, and yet this is the video where I officially ask that question. Why do I still like movies? Why do I still care about cinema as an art form? Not only do movies nowadays genuinely suck, but it's not even fun to talk about why they suck nowadays just because of certain people. There's no fun in saying that the Little Mermaid remake is a bad movie because you know that you're gonna run the risk of people assuming that you're racist or whatever just because of whatever the critical drinker had to say about the movie. It becomes harder and harder to criticize certain movies even if they do have flaws in them, even if, God forbid, they are genuinely bad movies, because of people like The Quartering. I primarily stick to older movies from the 90s, 2000s, early to mid 2010s for this very reason. I don't care about how things are nowadays. I don't care about like AI or anything like that. I don't care at this point. I'm just gonna pretend that we're still in the 2000s and that we're still getting tons and tons of great movies left and right. I would much rather pretend that Tobey Maguire is still Spider-Man, that we're still getting tons and tons of iconic comedies left and right, that Pixar still makes great, amazing movies. I don't care. I will admit, sometimes there are great movies that come out here and there. There are movies that remind me of why I love cinema, why I love movies as an art form. As a matter of fact, I have a video planned where I go over what I believe to be the best animated movie of 2024, a movie that is unfortunately largely getting ignored by the animation community, even though it is exactly the kind of movie that people should be saying animation is cinema for. But these movies are very few and far between. Most of the time you get crappy movies, and then you get people that hate on these crappy movies for crappy reasons. None of it's fun anymore. None of it's enjoyable to do. I don't hate Barbie because it's woke, because it's feminist propaganda or whatever, it's anti-male. I don't even hate Barbie at all. Again, I think this movie is just mediocre at worst, and what drives me into hating it is the fact that it reminds me of an awful period of time in my life. There are problems that I have with the movie itself, but ultimately those are trivial when compared to this. This is the main reason I don't like this movie. I don't expect people to agree with me with my takes on this movie, but at the very least, I just want them to understand where I'm coming from with all of this. I know that this is going to be an important movie for a lot of women. It already is, and you know, with how things are going to be in the next few years, this is going to be a very comforting movie for a lot of women, and I genuinely don't want to make them feel bad for liking liking this movie, but I cannot look back on this movie very positively just because of my own personal experiences. And again, you don't have to agree with me on my takes on it. You can still love the movie, but at the very least, understand where I'm coming from when I say that I don't like this movie. I don't hate this movie for the same reasons that the quartering hates it. I don't hate it for the same reasons that the critical drinker hates it. I don't hate it for the same reasons that Ben Shapiro hates it. Please understand where I'm coming from with this. Please. Please.